our prayer, and then we'll be dismissing to classes, which we may not have very many of. Okay. 453, not a step will I take without Jesus. 453. Not a step will I take without Jesus, is the vow that my heart shall make. Though I often am tempted to leave him, yet unto him my heart is safe. Not a step will I take, not a step without him will I go. He will lead me along to that beautiful
I think I told David a few moments ago, if there's only 10 or 12 of us, we weren't going to be scattered all over the auditorium, but I think that's probably a job bigger than any of us can undertake, is keeping us from being scattered. We would like our seats, and that's okay. That's okay. My neck probably needs a little exercise anyway. Good to be together tonight. Though few in number, it's still good to be together with brothers and sisters. We're in James chapter 4 tonight. James chapter 4, and we're going to pick up reading in just a moment in verse 11. You remember as you're turning there that we're studying a letter that obviously was written by James, inspired by the Holy Spirit, to Christians who, because of their faith, had been driven from the area where they had lived in and around Jerusalem and Judea. And these Jewish believers had been scattered all over the world. And because of that persecution and the scattering of them that resulted, they faced some very trying circumstances, some very difficult situations, and probably far more even than we imagine as we try to reflect and think about what their situation would have been like. But James writes a letter the purpose of which is to strengthen faith. And one of the ways that we strengthen faith, maybe the beginning of the process of strengthening our faith, is knowing how strong our faith is to start with, being honest about whether we have struggles in certain areas of our lives that need to be addressed. And James has been very good and very deliberate in pointing out several different ways or areas of our life where we can measure either the strength or the weakness of our faith, the maturity or immaturity of our faith. We pick up tonight with a very timely, I guess all of God's word is always timely, but I was thinking about, in fact, I did the radio program for the next week or so this morning, and I was thinking about how this is kind of an interesting time of year. For young people, for children, it's a very exciting time of year. They're anticipating Christmas and the presents under the tree and all those kinds of things. For those of us that have gotten a little older, we have different reasons for enjoying this time of year. We enjoy the fellowship of family and those kind of things probably far more than the gifts under the tree. But there's a large number of folks, in fact, maybe all of us to some degree, but a lot of folks who suffer an amazing amount of stress during this time of year. Whether it's because they've lost a loved one and this time of fellowship kind of reminds of that, or maybe it's the financial stress of trying to buy presents that you probably know you really shouldn't and can't afford and those kind of things, or it's just dealing with going into Walmart or someplace and there's people as far as the eye can see and only 2 people checking out. You know, there's all kinds of stress and struggle at this time of year. And I think one of the things that's healthy is for us to be a constant source of not just reminder, but example, for kind of taking a step back and remembering what gives us the privilege of having anything to celebrate, not just as a nation of people or as an individual, but in every facet of life. And Jeff mentioned it in prayer, whether we've been greatly blessed or whether we maybe not quite so much in other places in the world or certain people within our own country. The fact is, Jesus came to die to save us from sin. And that's a blessing for which we owe a debt of gratitude that it's not just a November thing or a December thing. It's an all year kind of thing. So I think it's pretty helpful sometimes just to step back and take a little bigger view of things and not get so caught up in the heat of the moment and the frustration of what I've got to do today or the problems or the struggles. But look at the blessings once in a while and how blessed we are. Now, with that in mind, James begins in verse 11 of chapter 4. Brothers and sisters, do not slander one another. Anyone who speaks against a brother or sister or judges them speaks against the law and judges it. When you judge the law, you're not keeping it, but sitting in judgment on it. There's only one lawgiver and judge, the one who's able to save and to destroy. But you, he says, who are you to judge your neighbor? Now, before we get into the discussion, and I hope it will be a discussion, about the challenges of not sitting in judgment on other people, we'll talk about that, I hope, in some detail here in a moment. I want to begin with the beginning statement. Now, it's obvious, again, if we didn't already know, that James is writing to Christians. He's writing to people who know the Lord. He's writing to people who are adopted into God's family. And it ought to be, just as is true every time we're corrected in Scripture, that he would never have to say to us, do not slander one another. What does slander mean? I mean, I'm not just asking for a legal definition, but let's talk about a little bit what slander involves. What is it? How would you describe it or define it? What is slander? Whatever it is, he says, don't do it to your brothers and sisters, okay? So it's a negative. It's a thing we're to avoid. But what is it? Okay. There's a lot of ways to do it. There's a lot of ways to do it, right? I mean, it could be whether we're making light of or pointing out the shortcomings of or just plain out being critical. Slander has to do not so much with one particular way that we say or one particular word or phrase of words that we say. It kind of has to do more with the attitude in back of what we're saying, doesn't it? It kind of carries with it the idea, am I trying to build up or am I trying to tear down? Am I trying to help someone or am I trying to hinder or hurt or be an obstacle to someone? That's right. Its aim is to, whether it's to lift me up by criticizing somebody else, or at least appearing to do that, trying to do that, the aim is always at demeaning somebody else. It's hurting their reputation or harming, or I can't think of the word. It speaks against their character, their integrity. Now, the reason I say there's more involved than just a specific set of words, sometimes our character deserves to be spoken against, doesn't it? Sometimes our actions are wrong, and they need to be spoken against, or they need to be addressed. But do my shortcomings, or let's turn it around, do your shortcomings need to be addressed by me to someone else? I mean, what good does that do? You see, slander is kind of a three-way thing. There's three people involved, generally. You don't normally slander someone to their face. You can, and I guess in anger, maybe you would occasionally. But that's not generally the way slander carries itself. Usually slander is something spoken about this person to someone else, isn't it? Why would we do that? I mean, what motive could we have for doing that? Why would a person be tempted to slander someone else? Jealousy? Jealousy? What else? It's an attempt to do that, isn't it? It's an attempt to do that. You know, I've thought a lot about, over the years, the tendency to gossip about other people, the tendency that we have to battle or deal with, if we're honest with ourselves. And the motive in back of that. When we choose to slander someone or speak against someone to another person, it can't be that we're trying to help that person unless we're speaking the truth. For example, there may be an occasion when I would have a conversation with the elders about someone else's struggle or situation or a weakness that they're battling, not with the purpose of defaming them, but with the purpose of informing people who have the share in the responsibility of helping lift them up. But slander is aimed at hurting. It's aimed at hurting, not helping. It's always destroy, tear down. Jeff? Yes.
It's easy to talk about somebody else if I'm not talking about to their face. If I'm gonna talk about someone to their face, you know, if I'm gonna talk to somebody to their face, I have to, that takes an element of courage to point out somebody's faults.
That's right.
In a loving manner.
That's right.
I can point out faults, you know, without being loving.
Right.
You know, and that's one thing. I'm not sure that's, you know, it's the attitude. I mean, because, what is talking to somebody else about somebody else's faults have to do with love?
That's right. Well, and again, we have to bear in mind, and we're going to get into this judgment thing here in a minute, and that's going to really take it to another level. But in the subject of dealing with slander, which is how he introduces this discussion, you can include in that a lot of forms of speech, a lot of things, a lot of other words that we talk about or use commonly. Gossip is one of those that you can lump right in there with that. I don't know why people pursuing righteousness still face the temptation and have to battle the consistent temptation or test of talking negatively, destructively about one person to someone else. Really, it's kind of boiled back down to we somehow fool ourselves into thinking that makes me look good, whether I know something nobody else knows, or whether I'm comparing myself to somebody else and am pushing them down in order to make me look like I've been lifted up. But the motive is always impure.
I agree with that. And so often the motive's not slander to make me look good, but to take the focus off of my shortcomings.
Yes.
As well.
Yes.
And that's just the other end of that spectrum.
Yes.
It could be either or. There's so many layers to it, yeah.
Well, really, if we take me out of the picture, slander's a non-issue. You know it? You think about that. You take me, whether it's to make me look better or to divert and deflect attention, whatever the reason. If you take me out of the conversation, out of the situation, then slander it gets no traction. There's no reason for it, no purpose in back of it.
My grandfather named after someone dead or passed on to me. He said, you can't build yourself up by tearing somebody else down.
That's right.
That's subtle, very true, and oftentimes I said it. Also talking about slander, talking to people without having to face them and everything. They would have that trouble now. What's social media about so many times?
That's exactly right.
That's what it is.
That's why it thrives, or one of the reasons. That's exactly right. Absolutely.
Sometimes you don't have the courage to talk to somebody directly about it.
Absolutely right.
Thinking it makes you look better.
And how we think them reading about it third hand after it's been shared with everybody else is going to help the situation is beyond me. You know, that I really don't think we could be sincere and say we're trying to help when we do that. So he begins this discussion about our relationship to each other. Now, it's certainly true that we ought not be slanderous toward anyone. But he's particularly addressing the relationship of brothers and sisters. He says that we shouldn't be that kind of person, practice that kind of habit. And then he goes on and said, anyone who speaks against, in the New International Version, which is, it's not the same word as slander, but it's very close kin. Anyone who speaks against a brother or sister or judges them speaks against the law and judges it. Now, where in the law are we told, or is it commanded, don't slander, or don't speak against a brother or sister, or sit in judgment on a brother? What law is that a violation of? Where is that law? Because that's kind of the case that James is building here. Everything from that statement on to the end of this context deals with our relationship to law, whatever this law is, that we violate by slandering or speaking against or judging someone. What law? Where is that law? Which one? Okay. What did Jesus say when he was asked the question about the most important law, the greatest law? That's right. That's right. In fact, he went so far as to say, loving God and loving your brother as yourself summarizes the entire law. He said the whole law hinges on those two statements, on those principles. So if we genuinely love someone, which goes back again to our relationship, right? If we genuinely love someone, I mean, how many of us would be quick to jump out in the community and slander or judge or speak against one of our children or our parents or our spouse? And let me qualify that. If you do feel comfortable doing that, then you have some really significant problems on a family level, you see. I mean, there's some serious issues there. If you find joy in making fun of, ridiculing, slandering, judging, speaking against someone you love, you don't really love them. Because if you love someone, you're putting their interest ahead of your own. You wouldn't think of trying to embarrass them or humiliate them. You're trying to help them.
Let me just use a personal example. When I was raised up through 1989, I had never thought in my entire life I would never be a Cowboys fan. I just assumed I would be a Cowboys fan forever.
Yeah.
Nothing, couldn't do anything wrong. It's Jerry Jones comes along. You know what my favorite pastime is for the past 30 years?
Watch them get beat, huh?
Talking bad about the Cowboys.
Yeah, yeah,
And Jerry Jones.
yeah.
Probably an element of slander involved. You know?
Well, if you think about it, what opens the door to us wanting to be critical of someone else, especially in public, or against someone to another person, what opens the door for us wanting to do that is us, rather than loving them, trying to put them down, trying to hurt them, trying to embarrass them, trying to humiliate something. I mean, there's a lot of words you can plug in there, but none of them are good words. None of them are things that we ought to be about. If it's true, and I suppose it is, since Jesus told us it was, that all the law hinges on, or is summarized by, loving God with all our heart, mind, strength, and soul, and loving our fellow man as ourselves. When we violate that principle, the truth is we can't claim to be any better than Adam and Eve were when they only had one command and they couldn't keep it. It's almost as if God summarizes our responsibility in relation to each other by saying, love each other the way I loved you. Now, he explains that by talking about forgiveness and bearing burdens and a lot of other things, one and other things. But all of them go back to the same thing, love. And if we are confused about what that means, then we just need to go to 1 Corinthians 13 and get a pretty good description of it. And we're not going to read that tonight, but you're familiar enough to know. Love doesn't seek to hurt someone else. It always seeks to lift somebody else up, to help, to build up. You know, probably we don't think about the fact that when we speak slanderously against a brother or sister, that we're actually sitting in judgment on the law. Really what we're saying is, God, I heard you say that was the most important thing among human relationships, but I've decided it's not. I've heard you say that all the world will know who my disciples are by our love for each other, but I don't care. You know, I mean, there's so many things that are tied to our relationships to each other. And again, I got into a discussion, actually I have on more than one occasion, with someone about the topic or the subject as we were studying about practicing disfellowshipping in the church and why we don't. Now, I've got no case in mind or nothing like that. I'm just saying, almost inevitably, Well, maybe that's not true. Very often in the course of that study, somebody will bring up the fact that, well, the reason we don't do that is because it doesn't work. It doesn't work. It just makes them angry. It just causes them to run off and start slandering the church or running down those people. It doesn't help anything. And my response to that is twofold. Number one, God said do it. God said do it, okay? That's enough. But one of the reasons why it might not work, if it doesn't, the way we think it should, is that maybe our relationships with each other weren't strong enough to begin with to make them hurt to not have it. I'm going to tell you something. If one of my kids decided they never wanted to see me again, they never wanted to have anything to do with me again, that'd be bad. That'd be a hurtful thing. I mean, I can't imagine what that would. That's terrible. That's terrible. I mean, that hits on a level that's almost hard to cope with, right? Well, if we understand that on the familial level or our families' lives, we need to learn to make the applications of that same principle to our spiritual family, because we're closer even than that. We have a bond that even supersedes the family relationship in terms of blood, right? Birth. I don't think most people ever really break it down in our thought process to when I speak against one of my brothers or sisters with the intention of tearing down rather than building up, with the focus on me for whatever reason, that what I'm doing is defying God. Because I don't think any of us would say we want to defy God. We want to rebel against God. We want to occupy or claim his throne. We know he's the only one that's qualified to sit on that throne, and that's what James reminds us of. He said, when you judge the law, which is what you do when you speak against your brother or sister, you're not keeping it, but you're sitting in judgment on it. And then he says in verse 12, there's only one lawgiver and judge, the one who's able to save and destroy. And while he doesn't name him, he doesn't have to, right? We know who that is. We all know who that is. And then he concludes by asking the rhetorical question, who are you? If you don't sit on the throne, if you don't judge, if you're not the lawgiver, who are you to judge your fellow man or your neighbor or your brother or sister? You know, well, I've talked enough. Anybody got a comment? I thought about that. How does that relate to your faith? Let me ask it that way. Let me ask it that way.
Where's the line drawn and not judge? We hear people tell us every time we get a thing,
Yeah.
they'll go back to a verse like this.
Well, I'll tell you my feeling, my understanding of that, David. Okay, there's not a 2 + 2 = 4 answer to that question, but we have direct instruction in Scripture to judge, to discern, to learn right from wrong, and we have a responsibility toward each other to help each other overcome, to hold each other accountable to those things. Now, again, the right judgment and the wrong judgment has to do with, number one, I can't judge your motives. I might be able to discern your actions as being appropriate or inappropriate, or the results as being appropriate or inappropriate, but I can never sit in judgment on your motives, because I can't know your heart. Only that's a God place thing, power, authority. So, that being said, if I find myself wanting to sit in judgment on someone's words or actions or behavior other than or outside of a judgment that God has revealed as right or wrong or true or false, then I'm assuming an authority that isn't mine to assume. I mean, there's a difference between telling someone what you're doing is wrong and telling someone that your heart or your motives are wrong in doing it. Now, we can probably individually, through spiritual discernment, observe that there are some people who seem to habitually fall victim to or prey to a particular thing that might cause us to say, maybe we need to help them not just not do that, avoid the circumstances that would lead to that. But again, judgment that's condemned, okay, is judgment that is designed to make you look bad and me look good. That's condemned. It's never right. Again, you take me out of the picture, and that pretty much answers the question or answers the situation. But if God has said something's true or something is right or something is false or something is wrong, it's not a judgment on our part to stand on that or to agree with that or to say that that's true and what I'm doing or you're doing isn't in agreement with that. That's not a judgment. That's a standing for what God says. Judgment is us discerning or trying to discern things that we don't have the authority to discern. And you know, that sounds simple, but the truth is we have to really think about that sometimes. I mean, I find myself quite often, I'm ashamed to say, drawing conclusions about things that really I need to be real careful about drawing conclusions about. Jeff?
Basically, what you're saying is that there's a massive difference between judging and correcting.
Yeah.
Guilty of judging
In the negative sense.
in the negative sense,
Yes.
but they're not so quick
That's right.
to take correction.
That's right. That's right.
Say, this guy's doing it wrong. And then wrong.
With no intention of helping him or no relationship that would make it easy for us, you and I, to have that conversation with each other.
Yeah. You said, okay, he's doing this wrong. No, this is the right thing to do. Okay, he's doing this wrong. How can I help him?
That's right. That's right. That's exactly right. And that's, you know, I talk to my wife and I talk a lot about kids and grandkids and dealing with them and that kind of stuff. And I said, you know, one of the things that I'd really work hard to try to do is try to envision in my mind the best case scenario. In other words, if I'm going to interject myself into a situation, I try to decide what's the likeliest course that I can take to make a good outcome, a positive outcome, things be the way they should be. Because it's easy for me to jump in the middle of it and handicap the process and make it unlikely because I'm too proud and probably I've stirred up somebody else's pride as well, where the odds of a good outcome are very small. In other words, if I raise my voice or if I'm red in the face, it's not likely that we're going to come to a really good resolution to this situation anytime soon. So, yeah, you're right. And in back of that again is the importance of having a relationship where correcting is possible or it's appropriate, it's likely to succeed. We're not normally very successful with people that we don't know well, to tell them that what you're doing isn't right or is wrong or however we choose to do it. It's those people who we have a relationship and they respect not only our discernment, but who appreciate our motive. You know, so they're not trying to push anybody down or rank themselves or whatever. Jeff,
I mean, basically, you're going there, but I'm sitting there going, you know, you got two people, actually, I thought I'd use Dave and Josh, you know, both of them say have the same problem, and I'm not trying to say either one got this.
right,
Say they habitually drink.
right,
A lot, you know, it's a continual problem for them. Let's just say that. I'm
Yeah.
not saying they do.
yeah,
Don't read anything into that. But, you know, I don't have a relationship with David. And I'm sitting there looking, man, he needs to straighten up. Why didn't he take care of his problem? Josh has the same problem. And I know because he and I are friends, I know he struggles with
it's not a scolding.
I know that because I have a relationship.
That's right. It's not a scolding. It's not a scolding. It's not a criticism. It's not a, I'm better than you, so shut up and sit down and listen to what I have to say. It's a relationship.
That relationship with David.
That's right. That's right.
The problem.
That's right. And then add another layer to that where James starts. How in the world, let's take that same situation, do you think you and I sitting down and talking about how sorry so-and-so is because they just keep falling off the wagon and doing this thing, how do we think that's going to help? You know, how does that fit in with God's plan? I just doesn't.
And then you put in to David, you go to David's point, well, you know, David won't quit. He knows better, he shouldn't be doing this. When's he gonna quit?
Yeah.
Where am I gonna draw that line that I'm gonna just do, you know,
Yeah.
stop even trying with it?
Well, and certainly David has the prerogative, and if I've decided or David's decided I'm going to continue supporting this habit and defend it, then he's very likely to say, who are you to judge me? And we hear that all the time. And again, that's a sign of a couple of things. One is either the relationship isn't strong enough for you to address that without the barriers going up, or number two, the person has resolved, I'm going to do it regardless. And of course, even if someone resolves to do it regardless, that doesn't change the fact that we're going to constantly work any way that we can to help plant the seed for that to stop, for that mindset to change.
And that's just another indication that there's a relationship issue.
Yes. Yes.
He said, I'm gonna do it regardless because, you know,
Yes. Absolutely.
he doesn't want, you know, he or I wants with it. But
A few minutes ago, you were talking about this fellowship,
Yes.
you know, what we're going through that.
Yes.
I went through that in church.
Well, I'm going to tell you, I'm not let me clarify. I'm not defending some of what's happened that we've called disfellowshipping before, because the truth is we punish people by trying to take something from them that they never had with us to begin with. If you and I don't have fellowship, I mean real fellowship, then it doesn't hurt you or I, either one, not to be together.
No outcome of that, it didn't bother people.
But you separate me from my wife or my kids, or you get my point, right? I mean, that's the kind of relationship. And I've seen it both ways, by the way. I've seen cases where it seemed to make someone angry. And I think I could explain to you why it did. But I've also seen cases where after a short period of time, they overcame that anger. It might have been the initial reaction, but they overcame that anger and came back and said, you know, I can't stand not being here. Y'all are too important to me. And made it right, which is what the point is anyway, which is the way it ought to be. And even then, it's not we're right and you're wrong. It's we're glad you're home. You know? So it kind of gets back to, again, the motive in back of, are we trying to run things down, run someone down, or are we trying to help build someone up?
Paul talks about that in Romans chapter 2.
That's right.
About how, you know, judging yourself, you condemn yourself if you don't have the right attitude, because he's trying to say, do it so that they can, they can come to repentance, not to damage you.
That's right.
Because God is the one that's going to be able to do the ultimate punishment. And you know, judge your motives right, or look at your attitudes right, and do what you can to lead them to repentance.
Everybody in here,
Regarding your own self and your own self.
absolutely. Everybody, every one of us have had an interaction with somebody at some point in our life that you felt like, or you were made to believe that this conversation, well, it made you feel small. It made you feel, I don't know what the right word is. We've all had interactions with someone who we felt like their point was, you're wrong and I'm right. Right? And that may have been true, but that shouldn't be the motive. That shouldn't be the reason we're doing it. Again, I can't say it very well for some reason. I've said it so many different ways. I still don't feel like I've said it very well. If we don't make a deliberate effort, well, husbands, let me say it this way. If you want your wife to do whatever it is you want your wife to do and think she ought to be doing it, maybe you're a little bit concerned that she hasn't been. The solution to the problem is not for you to come stomping in the house and raise your voice and say, I've been putting up with your problems, X, Y, Z, and whatever, and if you don't do something about it right now, let me just tell you, that's not going to help, okay? You're not going to get a good outcome, all right? You may be right. You may be speaking truth, okay? But that's not going to get a good outcome. Not going to get a good outcome. Consider how to help rather than push yourself up and say, look at me. Look at what I know. Look at what I can do. Take me out of the picture. Take me out of the picture. Okay, any other comment, thought?
Kind of boils down to it. I don't know where the saying came from, but I'm pretty sure it's a lot older than I am. But the best exercise for a man's heart is when he leans down to pick somebody else up.
That's right.
And I think that just kind of wraps it all up.
That's right.
Intention, motive. If we put me or I in any of that intent and motive, we're already out.
And I'm going to tell you, there's nothing more rewarding for even a semi-pure heart than to put somebody else's needs ahead of your own and watch that work. You know, that is an amazing thing to be a part of, particularly when we know that's exactly what Jesus did. Exactly. He had every right to come here to us and confront us and say, you don't deserve anything but punishment. He had every right. He just didn't deal with us that way. Even the people that were nailing him to a cross, he didn't deal with that way, you know, as if that's worse than any sinner's problems or sins. You know, it's, I think to me, one of the most provoking, and I shouldn't say this, but one of the most provoking parables or stories that Jesus used to illustrate a truth is when he talks about the guy who was forgiven a huge unpayable debt. And then the guy went out immediately and dealt with a guy who owed him pennies. And he dealt unmercifully with him. And he demanded what I want and what I deserve and justice. And how inconsistent that is. Just apply that across the board to our relationships to each other. When we speak condescendingly or critically of each other, slanderously of each other, we're doing exactly that. Think of what we've been forgiven. Think of what God deserves, I deserve to get from God, how he deserves or he treats me if he deals with me the way I tend to deal with others. That helps. It helps me a lot. It helps me a lot. It doesn't necessarily mean that I never have to fight the battle again, but it sure helps me through that crisis. Just remember, man, I've been forgiven a lot. Who am I to stand in judgment over somebody whose minor infractions don't even begin to compare? It's a wonderful thing, and we're going to close with this thought. It's a wonderful thing to think about trusting God enough that we can learn to deal with each other the way Jesus deals with us. That's an amazing thought. And I suppose this side of heaven will not master that. We'll always stumble at that. We'll always struggle with that. But man, when we struggle with it, let's be sure that we keep struggling and not try to make normal something that isn't normal, or right something that isn't right, or justify something that is unjustifiable. If Jesus has been willing to forgive me, then I surely have every reason to be patient and forgiving to others. I can't imagine having to stand before God and account for what I deserve to account for. And wonderfully, we don't have to. We don't have to. If you're here tonight and not in a right relationship with God, and of course, we particularly discussed the matter of measuring the strength of our faith based on how we deal with each other in our words, in our conversations, and in how we treat and interact with each other. But faith in God goes a lot deeper than that. It goes to every facet of our life. And again, boils back down to what reason do we have not to have absolute trust and confidence and faith in God? He's the only one who's worthy of being trusted and having faith in. If we can help you in any way tonight, please let us do that. Give us that opportunity while we stand and sing together.
Hark the gentle voice of Jesus, fall as tender you mind voicing our closing prayers with dismiss, please?
Bow me, please, y'all. Dear Lord, thank you so much for being our God and forgiving us always. And I want to pray, though, Lord, throughout these next days, help us be patient with family, Lord, and help us all to be thankful for the ones that we still have with us here, Lord. And thank you so much for giving us the ability to go out into the world and let people know who you are and what you've done for us. And thanks so much for Jesus dying on the cross for us. And as we go throughout our lives, please help us be patient with everyone, Lord, and most importantly, throughout our daily lives and at work, just help us shine our light so bright. Let people know we're Christians by our actions and how we talk and our language, Lord. And thank you so much, and please guide us and protect us throughout the rest